The rain was falling softly when Daniel stepped out of the building with a cardboard box in his hands. Inside it, all that was left of 3 years of work, a few books, a chipped coffee mug, a notebook filled with scribbles, and a photo with colleagues who had already gone their separate ways. The wet pavement reflected the streetlights, and each step felt heavier than the last. It wasn't just the weight of the box, it was the weight of not knowing where to go next. Losing his job had never been part of the plan, and in that moment, it felt as if, along with his badge, they had taken his confidence and the little sense of security he had left. In the days that followed, the silence in his apartment became unbearable. The ticking of the clock seemed to mock every passing minute. The walls, once filled with life, now only reminded him of unpaid bills piling up on the table. Even the smell of coffee, something he had always loved in the morning, felt too bitter. Daniel tried to distract himself, but every attempt led him back to the same question, echoing in his mind like a hammer. What now? One afternoon, while rummaging through a drawer for a document, he found an old photograph. In it, he was a little boy, sitting on the wooden porch of his grandfather's house, smiling wide and carefree, his bare feet swinging in the air. For a moment, he could almost smell the scent of fresh bread from the kitchen and hear his grandfather's deep laugh, telling stories. That place was only a few hours away, and he hadn't been there in over 10 years. Without thinking too much, he decided that was where he needed to go. He didn't know for how long, but he knew he couldn't stay where he was. The trip was on a nearly empty bus. Through the window, the city faded away, tall buildings giving way to open fields, wooden fences, and wind-twisted trees. The cold glass against his forehead and the steady hum of the engine lulled him into a state between sleep and wakefulness. Around each bend in the road, childhood memories returned. Running barefoot in the yard, the swing tied to the old fig tree, walking with his grandfather to the corner store. For the first time in weeks, Daniel wasn't thinking about bills or resumes. He just watched the landscape, as if the road itself was slowly clearing his mind. When the bus stopped, the town was smaller than he remembered, but it carried the same calm. Cobblestone streets, the smell of bread drifting from the bakery, the church bell marking the hours. At the bakery, a man behind the counter smiled and asked if he was Joachim's grandson. An elderly woman with her hair tied neatly in a bun offered to help with his suitcase. A neighbor said he remembered him running barefoot across the square with a slingshot in his hand. These were small gestures, but somehow they made Daniel feel less invisible. In the first few days, he simply walked around town. He passed by the square where children played without hurry, watched old men chatting outside the barber shop, and stopped to listen to a street musician playing guitar. In this slower rhythm, he realized it had been a long time since he had allowed himself to simply. He remembered how in the big city, even coffee had to be rushed, swallowed between meetings. Here, a cup of coffee could last half an hour, accompanied by stories and laughter. One day, while passing the grocery store, the owner, a man with a thick mustache named Ernesto, asked if he could help unload some boxes. Daniel said yes. It wasn't much, but when Ernesto shook his hand firmly and said, "Come back anytime, son," he felt something different, pride. That same feeling returned when he helped paint a neighbor's fence or fix the roof on a garage. These were simple tasks, but each one gave back a piece of the self-worth he thought he had lost. At night, Daniel began writing in a notebook what he had done that day. No big achievements, just small victories. Talked with Mrs. Marta and laughed about the past. Helped Ernesto and got a free coffee. watched the sunset from the square and thought about my grandfather. As the days passed, he noticed something unusual. He was sleeping better, waking up with more energy, and even smiling without a reason. It was on one of those afternoons, sitting on a bench in the square while the sun turned the buildings gold, that he thought, maybe I didn't lose everything, maybe I found what really matters. It wasn't about going back to his old job or getting back what he had before. It was about building something new, simpler, but truer. Daniel understood that starting over isn't about returning to what you once had. It's about beginning a new story with the pages you still hold. And sometimes it's in that new chapter that you find real success. Not success measured by salary or status, but by the peace of waking up knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. If you've ever had to start over, you know the first step is the hardest. But every step, no matter how small, opens the path a little more. And if today feels like the end of something, maybe it's just the beginning of a different story. What will yours be? Share in the comments a moment when you had to start over. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to find courage right now. And subscribe to this channel, because tomorrow there will be another story that might be the push you need to take your next step.